I'm Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Angela.
We are the Ink Mages. Join us as we discuss all things fantasy, world building, storycraft, myths and legends, and of course, our own imaginative stories. Welcome to the Ink Mages podcast. We are so excited that you have joined us today. We are going to be tackling a topic that we have discussed for a while that we've wanted to do, and it is cover design and illustrations. And Angela has a wonderful template format that she's going to take us through that is all about the do's and don'ts of cover design. So, Angela, why don't you start with that?
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I think that there's a lot of unknowns out there, especially for those of us who are self-publishing and even those of us who are going through publishers that still allow a lot of creative input and freedom, on their cover designs. It's really, really important to know what goes into making a good marketable cover. I don't know how many of you know that listen to the podcast, but I actually do work for a publisher. And so I've been through the school of the do's and don'ts of publishing and specifically cover design. And cover design is one of those that you really need to kind of have a clue as to what is selling and what looks good. And we're not going to cover the array of all types of book covers that you could do for all the different genres. We're specifically talking about fiction covers, fantasy, sci-fi, paranormal. Those kind of cover designs have a particular look. With cover design, one of the things you want to keep in mind is that being unique is not best. And I know that sounds crazy, especially because so many of us who write stories are also creatives. And so we want to have these beautiful covers that we've imagined in our minds to just, put out there on display. But it's a combination of, yes, kind of imagining a beautiful cover, but also finding out what works in your specific genres. So we're going to break down just a little bit, talking about finding out what your genre is specifically, because even in fantasy and in sci-fi, we have our subgenres, right? We don't just have, fantasy. We have historical fantasy. For example, my books are historical fantasy, or it could be urban fantasy, or it could be dystopian fantasy. There's a lot of subgenres, and how to research those and find out what's already working so you know how to put that on your cover. So we're going to break that down just a little bit. We're going to also talk about what kind of details you want on your covers and what details you want to avoid, because you don't want a ton of things just all over your cover. Too many details is going to draw the eye, too many different directions. You want to keep the main thing. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then we're going to talk about the right cover versus the wrong cover. And this one I have experienced firsthand. I published my first book and I had a beautiful cover, but it was the wrong cover. Even though it was beautiful and it was marketable, I had created a cover that was not for the correct genre. And we'll kind of go through that a little bit as we get there. So anyway, I'm really excited to dive into this because I want all of you being able to go out there and create fantastic covers and feeling confident about your cover design.
Yes.
And feel proud and feel like it's something that you can display. I've got my books here, and
I got mine.
Yes, and you want people who look at your book to go, "Wow, that's an awesome cover," and you don't want the details of your story to be lost.
Yes, I know I've been told you want your cover to jump off the shelf. It draws the eye, so people go pick it up, and then they turn it over and they read the blurb. So it's like a twofold thing. The cover catches their eye, they read the blurb, now they want to open it up.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. It's whatever's going to make them reach for the shelf. And here's one fun thing to keep in mind, specifically in like the fantasy and the sci-fi genres, is if you have a magical creature like a dragon or a specific type of planet or spaceship that is really a main theme in your book, make sure that is on the cover, because people who love dragons are going to pick up a cover that has a dragon on it. So if you have a dragon in your fantasy book, make sure it's on the cover, even if it's just one of the letters in your title or it's just a detail on the cover. If there's a dragon in it, put it on the cover. There's a magical creature in your book. Find a way to make sure people know that at a glance instantly. Yes, yeah, Leah, one of the authors that is a friend of ours, and I've also gotten to work with, she has a dragon on her cover. I have a dragon on all three of my covers. So find that like little magic thing, you know, whether it's a sword or whatever's going to appeal to your audience and you know it. And one of the ways to know that is, what do you love when you're going to the bookstore and you're picking up a book? What captures your eye? What makes you want to grab that book? And I know for me, certainly, if I see a dragon on the cover, I'm instantly reaching for that book because I want to, ooh, there's dragons in this book. I want to know a little bit more about it. And I'll turn over the back and look at the blurb. And that's exactly what you want to get out of a book cover. So one of my tips for knowing how to develop your cover is first understanding your genre specifically. So again, if you're fantasy, that's the first part of the genre you're going to be researching on Amazon and bestsellers. But then you want to find out, what are some of the elements of your fantasy? Is it historical? Is it high fantasy? Low fantasy? Is there a mix? Is there time travel? If there's time travel, when you're searching on Amazon, fantasies with time travel, this is going to have different elements on the cover than a straight historical fantasy or a high fantasy would, for example. Is there romance in your book? You want to really narrow this down, because if you want readers who love romance to pick up your book, you want that feeling to be on the cover. Is it a thriller or a mystery? Is this a military sci-fi? So there's outer space operas, there is military sci-fi, and there is a gross difference between a military sci-fi cover and a space opera cover. Is it steampunk, or what some people call a gas lamp? You would definitely, if you have those elements in your story, you want to highlight that somewhere on the cover. Is it supernatural, paranormal? Is it something that deals more with monster hunters and modern day mixed with fantasy elements or sci-fi elements? Is it a Western? So you want to ask yourself those questions, and you want to narrow your focus in so that you're picking your main genre, which is sci-fi or fantasy, and then you pick your subgenre. And then you want to go to Amazon and you want to look up best sellers. For me, it would be historical fantasy books. And you're going to look at all of the covers. And one of the things that I do is I actually collect the covers that are best selling, that most appeal to me. And I screenshot them, and then I line them up and look at what all of those covers have in common. I notice for a lot of historical fantasy, you have a character on top and then the historical element on the bottom. And so you start to kind of see these themes, how they line up. And then there's also understanding your age group. So this is going to change things exponentially when you're searching on Amazon for best-selling covers. Is this a middle grade book? Is this a young reader's book? Is this a young adult book or an adult fantasy? All of those come into play on the cover design. So again, this is where you don't want to be too creative. You really want to appeal to the right audience. You go onto Amazon and you type that in, line up the books, take a look at them, and see what they all have in common, and pull from books what is appealing to you. When you go to your cover designer, you're like, I particularly like this font. Don't leave it up to the cover designer, because a lot of the times, if you leave it up to the cover designer, they're not going to get a clear picture. They're not reading your book. They're not getting everything that's going to be the most important for it to be on the cover. So you need to know what kind of fonts you like, what kind of color schemes that you like, and what's already selling for your genre, and the look and the feel of what you want to have on the bookshelf. And then they can also guide you into what's marketable, but you have a clear vision already. So for example, I'm going to skip ahead. because it has to do with this. I had, and we're going to, for those of you who are listening on Spotify, you might want to jump over and check out this podcast on YouTube, because we're going to be putting some examples up on the screen for you to check out. But my first book was published with this beautiful cover. So mine's a historical fantasy. I paid to have a really excellent cover designer do my design, and then I put it out there in the world for everyone to see it, and nobody bought my book, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And my publisher had determined it had to do with the cover. And the cover was beautiful. And if my book was a romance, it would have done great. So that's what we started as we were looking at the cover, and we started analyzing, and we started looking on Amazon at other books that were historical fantasies. My cover looked nothing like those covers. And it had, it had the right color schemes. It had a lot of the right elements if it was a romance, and all of the fantasy and historical elements just disappeared into my cover. You couldn't even see them. So we had to do a redesign, and it was hard for me because not only had we put the cover designer and I put a lot of work into that cover, but I loved it. I was like, oh man, like it totally hurt to let that cover go.
I think we fall in love with our first cover,
yes,
especially if we loved it. So it is hard to let it go.
It was. I really loved it. I thought we had done such a beautiful job, representing my character and doing all the things that I thought you were supposed to do. But I had misunderstood my genre. And that was the thing. It wasn't the cover designer's fault. It's that I wasn't able to communicate to the cover designers my specific genre. And so it came off as a romance book instead of historical fantasy. So you'll see, I'll put up an example of my new cover. You've got magical elements, things that represent magic. You've got a detail of a dragon on there. You have historical elements, and then the character. The whole cover reads historical fantasy very clearly. You look at it, you see the fantasy, the historical, and the magic right there on the cover with 3 simple elements. And that's the thing, is if you can, in your story, kind of think of those simple elements that speak volumes about what your book represents, those are the things and the details you want to have on the cover. But we'll talk about that here in just a minute.
Will you be tackling like the color options too?
Yes.
Okay, awesome, great. Because I know for certain genres and subgenres, certain color schemes pop.
Yes, and that's actually a huge point. So first, you want to keep your details refined. I always say pick 3 elements that you feel like communicate your story best. Sometimes you can have more elements on there. I think it depends on your cover designer and how they've designed the cover, but you really want to not go too crazy and just have everything that you could possibly think of on your cover that, details your story. You want to have just enough elements on there, again, to make somebody want to reach and grab the book off the bookshelf. So keep it down to just a few elements. And color palette. This is what Stephanie was talking about. You want to pay attention to color palettes. I don't know if you ever look at movie posters, but most movie posters, even if you look at like Stranger Things or like the new Dune movie that's coming out, Raiders of the Lost Ark, or Star Wars, if you were to look at all of those movie posters, all of them are either gold, blue, red, or a combination of the 3. Those colors, for whatever reason, capture the eye and speak loudly entertainment. It's like the epic feel. You see a lot like in Star Wars, where you see like the blue and the reds and the golds all kind of blending together on the, on the covers. And so when you're doing a cover, like you'll even look at Stephanie's first cover for the Iron Kingdom series, lots of gold highlighted on that cover. That particular color will grab the reader's eye. My cover has actually gold, blue, and red woven in the cover. And again, you don't have to have all 3, but picking one of those colors or a combination of those 3 are going to grab the reader. Again, if you go on Amazon and you look up best-selling covers, I challenge you to find a cover that doesn't have blue, red, or gold on it that's doing well in the market. So really think about your color schemes. And then if maybe a color in the book is something that is relevant to your story, let's say green is like the color of, or purple is the color of a magical system or something that happens in your book, you most definitely want to have that color highlighted on the cover somewhere. So you see with the Landis cover that Stephanie was holding up, it's got lavender and purple tones and then gold writing. So really think about what's capturing the eye. Gold and yellow really captures the eye and goes well with a lot of other color schemes. So let's say you don't want to do blue or red. Really consider having your title in gold. Have those letters really highlighted against the colors that you're using. So really think about that. And again, I would challenge you, pick out your favorite best-selling authors in your genre, look at their covers, line them up, and look at their color scheme. And pick your color scheme based off of that. For me, my book, my character Eleanor has blue eyes and her color manifests blue. So in my first color, I made sure her eyes were highlighted and there was a lot of blue on the cover. Whereas for book 2, I have Merlin and his magic is highlighted with yellow. He has golden eyes. So I had gold really highlighted on the cover for that one. So think about those. And then my whole series, so my book 3 is about to come out. I've got blue for the first cover, gold for the second cover, and red for the third. So even as you're lining them up, all 3 together, you're seeing all 3 of those colors and it looks fantastic. It jumps off the page. And another thing, before you have a cover done, consider whether or not this book is going to be a part of a series. Sometimes that's hard to know when you're writing a book. Maybe you didn't know it was going to be a series after you wrote it and it was published, and then a series just kind of happens. But if you can, think about that ahead of time, because you want all of your covers to look like part of a series, like they're from the same book, same fonts, same look and feel to the spine, same logos from your publisher, or if you're self-publishing, the logo of your publisher, having all of the spines and the covers looking like the same series with the series titles on them. And again, sometimes it's unavoidable. You weren't able to think about that ahead of time, but think about that from then on out, how you can make them look like they're a part of the same series. What's hot and trending right now is full text covers. I'm going to give some examples on the screen, but the full text cover where it's all about the text. There are a whole lot of elements. You've got this beautiful title-driven cover with just the author's name. And that's another tip. Authors' names should not be tiny. They should be big. The more popular you are, the bigger your author name should be. Yes. But don't let it disappear. You want that seen. But title-driven covers are huge right now. So if you do a title-driven cover, you want to pick maybe 1 or 2 elements from your book to be details around the title. You don't want a whole lot else. You maybe want a color scheme. You want maybe like if it's a moon or a dagger or, lace. Whatever it is that goes along with your genre, you want to have that detail on there, but you don't want to have a whole lot else going on. It's all about the title. Look up a bunch of title-driven covers. Right now, those are hot and they're trendy. And then the other kind of cover you can have, both Stephanie and I have those, and they're really popular with YA books and some adult fiction, is the character-driven cover. If you're going to have a character, it's going to be all about that character. And again, small little details. Make sure if you have someone illustrating, and we're going to talk about illustrators, but if you have someone illustrating that cover, they leave room for a big, large title still, and author name. But think about what it's going to be important about, what you're highlighting about that character on the page. And if you can do it well, those are really going to cause people to reach out and grab the book. So think about that. You want the character to be very eye-catching, very appealing, and make people curious. Yeah. Stephanie's holding up her first book in the Iron Kingdom series. And you have Rowan right there on the cover.
I was just going to say the elements that we added was his spear is in the background because he is a warrior and fights with a spear. Also, close up around his fists are the wisps from his curse, because he has a life draining curse. So that alludes to that. That's a second little detail. Plus, he's an albino, his white hair and his ponytail. So you've got the full aspect of the character, and it screams fantasy, big title. So, and there's a tagline. So that's something to think about too.
Yes.
If you have a catchy short tagline, that can find a place for that on the cover.
Yes. So think about that, especially if you're having someone illustrate the cover, like that you're going to be having text elements on this cover. And so you want to make sure that the cover is created with the dynamics for room for all of these elements that you want to have on your book. And taglines can be very, very powerful way to also grip people who might want to grab it off the shelf, because it just has the right words that make them want to reach out and grab that book.
Taglines up at the top for Landis says, in a world where light governs, darkness is primed to return. So
yes,
yeah, I love them. A tagline can make me even more interested.
Yes. And if you're going to do a character driven cover and you have multiple POVs, I would suggest picking out the character that you're highlighting the most. I would not recommend having more than 2 characters on the cover. You can have up to 3, but again, the more you put on your cover, the more distracting your cover becomes. So really try to narrow in the focus. I had this idea of I wanted both of Merlin and Eleanor to be on my cover, but it just wasn't as dynamic. So one of the things that I did so that both of them could be alluded to was on book 1, I had Eleanor as the main feature, and then I had reflection of Merlin in the sword that she's holding.
Right.
So you can always kind of find creative ways to allude that there's more characters that are important in this story. In book 2, I did the same thing. I had Merlin as the main, and then I just had the reflection of Eleanor in the sword. For book 3, I had a harder time because now I have 3 strong POVs. I wanted to include all of the characters, and it just didn't make sense. And this time a reflection in the sword just wasn't gonna work out. And so it was just Arthur reflecting on the main page, and then some of the main elements from the storyline. But there are creative ways that you can include other characters. You can even put silhouettes as small details in the corner. But whatever you do, just don't make your cover messy. You want really refined details, because the more refined and the less that is going on, the more people's eyes are going to be drawn, because those main elements. My first cover of Eleanor and the Song of the Bard, it had a sword right on the edge of her face, but it was right on the corner of the cover. And most people didn't even notice, even though it's giant and huge on the cover, most people didn't even know there was a sword on the cover. And that was supposed to be one of my historical references. On the corner, I had this Celtic design, but it was kind of shadowy and in the background, and most people didn't see it. All they saw was Eleanor. So when I redid the cover, I made sure that the historical elements were pronounced and the fantasy and magic elements were very pronounced. But the more details you have, the less pronounced those details can be. And then the person picking up your book has no idea what kind of book they're holding. So you want it to be very, very clear when they look at it, like, oh, historical, fantasy, character, this is the character from the book. Or if it's title driven, it needs to be in the title. So really make sure that title is very punchy. If you're going to have a title driven cover, you don't want it really wordy or archaic. It's okay to have kind of an archaic title if it's really important and essential to your book. But if you're going to do a title driven cover, it's got to be a very punchy title. So make sure you've really done your research to get that title right, so that it's really smacking somebody upside the face, so you don't need other elements to draw it in. And I would recommend, when you are doing a title, try to keep it 1, 2, 3 words if you can. My titles are definitely not 1, 2, or 3. I always have the Eleanor and the Song of the Bard and Merlin. And
that's a key fantasy element, is the
yes.
of the. So that's something
Yes.
with the titles is usually, if it's a title cover, there's a rhythm.
Yes,
to the
that's good.
title. So it's like A Court of Mist and Fury, the House of Flying Daggers. It's ping pongy almost. And
Yes,
so I'm not personally a fan of title covers. I'm just going to say that. And I know they're super popular right now,
they
especially with
are.
romantasy. I'm seeing it everywhere, like in the YA romantasy genre. But to me, it doesn't tell me anything. I
Yeah.
prefer a character driven cover because then I'm like, at least I am already being introduced to what the story is about. Emblems can be catchy too, but I'm always going to gravitate towards the character.
Yep, that's me too for sure, which is why my books have a character driven cover. And I think that's a good question to ask yourself. What do you love to see
Mhm.
when you're in the bookstore and you're looking for a book? If you are middle grade or a young reader, a book type of book, you're going to want to really consider hiring an illustrator. And this is where we're going to segue to talking about illustrators and how to hire an illustrator for your book, like all of those kinds of things. Middle grade and young readers really benefit from a more kind of colorful illustrated cover. And you'll see Stephanie is holding up Wizards of the Apocalypse. We had Xombi on our show. She's awesome. She actually does all of her own illustrations. And her book is a middle grade. And I do think with middle grade, if you can afford to do it, um, chapter illustrations or even illustrations throughout your book is a really great way to appeal to that younger audience and make them want to read your book. So Leah Brown's book has these fantastic illustrations throughout. So I would definitely say that's again something that's going to cause somebody to want to look at that book. So a kid, because these are kids that are pulling these books off the bookshelf, you want to have a cover that they go, ooh, that looks cool. And then they're probably not going to read the blurb. They're going to open the book. And if the pictures are cool, they're going to want to read the book.
I'll also say for YA and I mean adult fantasy too, most readers love illustrations.
Yeah.
I'm part of a Facebook reading group, and when my book was highlighted for the book club, a couple people bought them, and then they had to shout out pictures from The Conjurer's Curse because they were obsessed with the illustrations. And so just a couple people posting photos of like my chapter illustrations and some of the other illustrations in the book, people were like, "Oh my gosh, it's beautiful. I'm going to buy it." Just because there was illustrations.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a young adult and readers love to be immersed in fantasy. That's why we read and write fantasy. We like to be immersed. We want escapism. So you're giving your readers an invitation to jump into your world with the illustrations you provide.
Well, and you'd be amazed how affordable it is. I think sometimes we start talking illustrations and people go, ooh, it's really expensive, especially if you're self publishing. I have an amazing illustrator. I'm actually, for the book that I'm writing right now, I'm going to have her illustrate the cover for me, which is a good way to get a dynamic cover if you can't find, because a lot of covers are put together with Shutterstock photos and Adobe stock photos and things like that. But sometimes you can't find that picture that can be altered and be dynamic enough on the cover. So you hire an illustrator. And I have this illustrator that has done black and white pieces for the inside of my books. And my historical fantasies are adult fantasy books. And I hired her off of Fiverr, and she does her illustrations for $50 a pop. And it's amazing how you can find some of these illustrators who will do excellent works of art without charging an arm and a leg to do the work for you. So there are ways to find illustrators. Another way Stephanie and I were talking about earlier is on Instagram. So you can go on Instagram, look up illustrators and people who are there's a lot of people who are still building their portfolio even, and they're just looking for an opportunity to start getting some stuff out there, get some stuff even published in people's books. They're not even claiming the rights for their illustrations. So you get to own the illustrations, own the copyright, put them in your book. And then these artists have the benefit of having a portfolio of stuff that they've done for other people, and it benefits everybody, but they usually are for a cheaper price. The one thing about sometimes when you get these amazing illustrators is once they get a good enough portfolio, their prices start to go up. So then that means it's time to hunt for a new illustrator. But there are tons of resources on Fiverr and on Instagram as far as illustrators. And I've had a map. So if you have a fantasy book that travels across lands, I know Stephanie did this with her book, is getting someone to do a map for you. Again, Fiverr is a fantastic resource for getting this done. I know people who play D&D. There's a lot of D&D map makers on Fiverr, and they will do a map for your book. I had a map done on Fiverr. Same artist has done all of my books so far, and she charges $35 for a map. So
I didn't know that she's the one that did the map too.
yeah, it's actually a different artist on Fiverr. So a different one.
Okay.
Yeah. So a different artist. So I've got a couple of people that I work with, and it's fantastic work. And a lot of the artists on Fiverr have a portfolio of the work that they've done. So you can kind of scan through and see. I've had a lot of success with that.
Question on that one. Did you have to have a really thorough idea of the layout of your world that you sent them? Because that always was my hesitation, that like, I don't know if this is going to translate well, like where the kingdoms are located, rivers, oceans, or did you just give them a very rough sketch?
That's a really good question, because I have to say I was really intimidated doing it for the first time, like getting a map made. I'm like, oh, how do I do this? Now mine is a little different because since it's a historical fantasy, there is the landscape of England and Ireland that I got to borrow as far as like the shape. But all of the lands and places had different names. So I'm embarrassed because I actually consider myself an artist, but I can't do maps. And I did this sketch that was absolutely terrible. And I took a picture. I'm like, okay, I want mountains here. I want this name here and this king's name here. And, I basically just kind of wrote it out and sketched it out and took a picture of it and sent it to her. And she did a fabulous job with it. I was amazed that she was able to take what I had suggested to her and make something into it. And these people who illustrate maps are accustomed to creating maps. So they really are actually fairly brilliant with what you give them. She first try, I said, I'd like to have some Celtic elements on there. And she found like this Celtic whirly dragon that she put on there. She found this really cool Celtic compass rose that she put on there. So she had a little creative freedom that I got to, that I really liked that she did. I would keep in mind that if you are self-publishing and going through Ingram Spark or KDP, not putting a border on your map unless you want the map really shrunk down and not kind of bleeding off the page a little bit, because that if you have a border, you will have to shrink it down. So I had a border on one of my maps and had to remove it because I wanted the map spreading all the way across the page. So keep that in mind when you're working with the map creators. But yeah, if you can get a rough sketch, the names and places, and a lot of the time they do the illustration and you get to work with them and say, hey, can you change this or that, or readjust the shape of this, and they can do that until it's finalized. So it's not like one and done where you just give them a rough sketch and they give you whatever they got. You get to kind of work with them and get things refined and all the details lined out.
Yeah, that is awesome. I'm gonna probably take you up on the map person you used. I also know someone on Instagram. So author friend Brian Deckard, he has a map in his book, which is phenomenal. And the artist is called Myths and Maps on Instagram. You can just go to his page and watch him just ink his maps, and they look amazing. So there are people out there, and I think that's their skill set is maps. So I guess if you give something super rough, they'll probably make something very beautiful. In mine, I just used Canva to make my map, but I think it turned out great for me just doing it, but it's probably a great template that I could send to an actual map maker and they just upscale it times 10. So
Well, and another tip for getting a map made is go to your bookshelf. Look at some of the maps in the books that you're already reading, or go to the bookstore and find the style that you like. Sometimes if you go on Fiverr and you look at these map makers, they already have some styles that you can look up, choose from. But if there's a strong style that you like, or another art, book out there with map art that you just love, that really helps the map creators to do a really good job and nail exactly the look that you're wanting for your book.
I feel like
But
you have done an amazing job, Angela, with all these tips. We've covered cover design, illustrations, and maps. And I think most of us love maps. So, when you see that cover, it grabs you off the shelf, and then you turn a couple pages and there's a map. It's like, wow, we have a world here. And that reader just can't wait to jump in.
Well, and I love reading books with maps. They're not a must have, but for me, I'll be reading something and they're like, and they went south and and I'll have to turn back to the map because I want to see where they're at. And so I like having that detail. These are just details that can make your book fun and creative and just give people another reason to grab the book off of the bookshelf. And that's what we want as authors. There's such a huge world of fantasy authors out there, which is amazing. But you want to give a reason for someone to reach your book instead of the other book that's sitting next to it on the shelf in the Barnes & Noble or wherever your book is being listed. You want that wow factor right away, because especially if you're a new author, they want to trust that what they're about to buy is going to be worth their while. So all of those elements coming together are things that will help you get more copies of your book out there. And I couldn't highly recommend more using 100covers.com or getcovers.com. They are a cheaper way to get your book cover designed. 100covers.com is where I get my covers designed, and you would never know that I hadn't paid hundreds of dollars to get my covers designed. And they let you refine as many times as you need to until you get it right, which I think is rare. Sometimes you spend upwards of $600 to $700 to have somebody design your cover, and they only give you 3 passes to refine your cover. And 100covers.com, they may not get it right at the beginning, but you can go back and forth with them as many times as you want until you have a cover that you're happy with. So I couldn't recommend them more. It'll save you a lot of money on your book cover design, and I've had huge success with them, but I needed to know what to communicate with them as far as how my cover needed to look for my specific genre. So hopefully this episode has helped equip you to design a good cover, to get some good illustrations for those books. And we love being able to help all of the authors that listen on this channel, and all of those who love to read and just love being part of our channel, have an exciting experience while they're reading our books. So please leave a like, comment. What are some of your favorite book covers that you've seen? We'd love to see them. Share them with us. And if you have any suggestions or comments, we'd love to hear them. So we're really looking forward to the rest of this month. We've got a lot more exciting episodes coming up. So please stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.